Hello, and welcome to this week's ARK editor video. This video will be a little bit different than normal in that we're not working on our main map, but I will be showing a way that you can overlay a map uniquely onto a terrain. So this was brought up to me by a couple of people in our Discord. If you haven't joined our Discord, subscribed, liked, comment, all that jazz, you should do so. We're always around to answer questions and all that stuff. So please do join us. With that said, they asked me if there was any way they could put an image on their landscape. And the short answer is not really. But it is an interesting problem, and I wanted to solve it for them. So I've come up with a solution that I think will be quite interesting and potentially a better way to build maps in the future if I make another map. So I'm going to do all this on another world, but I just wanted to show you the finished product. What we have here is a landscape, which if we zoom in on, we'll see it's underneath a plane, but this landscape is totally green. We can go up to our shaping tools. We can sculpt it. We want to sync it. We can do that. And our reference image stays the exact same. So I think that's pretty interesting. It's an interesting idea that I like a lot, and it may be something that I end up using in the future. But this is the process to where you can get to this point where you have a reference image on your landscape and you're able to sculpt and adjust your landscape and compare it to a reference image. So we're going to need two applications today. Obviously, we need our ARK editor dev kit, and we're also going to use Blender, but Blender is going to be really simple. It's not much at all. The first thing we're going to do in Blender, and I'll go through all these steps, we'll open up a new file. We're just going to select everything here. This is B to click and drag, and I'm just going to hit delete. And I have nothing in my scene right now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to create, hit plane, and I just want a plane at the center that I can use and import into Unreal, because Unreal doesn't natively have a plane, at least in the ARK dev kit. They have a landscape, but the landscape can't accept the material we're trying to use. So we need to put it on a plane that can sort of mirror our landscape, so to speak. We have one thing to do before we export it, and that is to create a UV for it. So we go down here. This should be the standard view of your Blender in the current version. Go down here, go into edit mode, hover over it. We're just going to hit U and hit Smart UV Project. Now normally this is how you unwrap a 3D model and how you can texture it, but in our case it's just a single plane, so it's textured by two squares. We don't really care what they are, we're just going to drop an image on it. So now that we've done that, we'll go back into our object mode, make sure that it's selected, hit File, Export, FBX, and we're just going to export this plane into a location that we can import it into Unreal Engine. So I'll just drop this on my desktop for now. I'm going to name it plane 2 since I've already done this. But it's just an FBX that we're going to then import into Unreal. So here we are in Unreal. We're going to create a new level. So this is going to be our image. I can't name it image. I guess image overlay. This is our image overlay world. We're just going to load into this level. Sure, I'll save this. And right now there's nothing in it. So we want to do a couple things really quick. So the first thing that we want to do is we are going to drag a directional light in here. We can go to Shift 1 to go to our place modes. If you happen to be in another one, just hit Shift 1 and go into our place modes. We'll go to a light and we'll just click and drag a directional light on here. With nothing else in the scene, this won't actually do anything, but it will begin to do something in just a moment. And we're going to import our landscape. For the sake of brevity on this video, I'm just going to make a small landscape if you were going to make a large landscape, you'd want 63, 127, or 256 squads. This is how much it splits it up. And you'd want the number of components to be higher to have a higher resolution height map. But in my case, I just need this to be pretty small. We're just showing a proof of concept here. So I'm just going to make sure that I am using the material mi_new island. This is the material that has all of the landscape paints on it. Landscape materials are a little bit different than other materials in Unreal Engine, being that they have special image textures that allow you to paint on them, whereas other materials just have one texture. So I'm going to create this landscape, and it's going to be totally blank. That's perfectly fine. And what I'll do really quick is I'm just going to cover it in grass. So this should be potentially a little slow as it renders. And there we have it. Our whole landscape is covered with this grass material. Fine and dandy. That's exactly what I did with our other material. This is no different. So I'm just going to grab our directional light really quick, and I'm going to move this up out of the way. Because I don't want it interfering with this at all. So the next step that we're going to do is we're going to import our plane and the FBX that we made into Blender. So I have plane 1. Yours should be whatever you named your FBX. We're going to hit import, select the plane, and we're going to import it into Unreal. We're not going to change any of these settings. They're all perfectly fine. You can ignore an error message if you get one. It's perfectly fine. So we have this plane. We can click and drag it into the scene, move it up, scale it up, and we should see that we have essentially something that amounts to looking like a landscape, but isn't a landscape. It's just a plane. And on the underside, you can see through it, but just like with a landscape, the top you can see. That's fine. That's dandy. That's all we want. And the real magic to this is going to come in the form of material. So we're going to make a material, and this is going to be our transparent image. So we have our transparent image mat, and we're going to come up here to edit this material. This is relatively simple, but I will go through it slowly just so we are all on the same page. When you open up a new material like this, it will have the opaque blend mode set up. And you'll see this node here with a number of options. And materials in Unreal can get really unwieldy and really complicated, but we're going to keep it simple. Today we're going to talk about opacity, and we're going to talk about base color. And that's it. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to come over here to the right, and I can right click. It opens up the search bar. This is my general preferred way to do this in Unreal, whether it's with the ARK Dev Kit or, you know, Unreal Engine 4 or something of the like. This is just how I typically do these. So I right click, get to the search bar, and then I just search what I'm looking for. So in this case, I'm looking for a texture sample. And a texture sample is really just a way that you can import an image and attach it as a base color or a different type of map. So if you have a normal map, you can use a texture sample. It takes a 2D and applies that to a 3D material. So in this case, we're using this 2D image and we're going to apply it to a 3D material as our base color. And we'll see right away that it says there's an error because we have no texture here. And this gives me time to talk about what I'm using. So this is a map that I just pulled off of Google. It's just a map of Europe that's perfectly square. It's important that this map is perfectly square because the landscape in ARK is perfectly square, at least initially. So if we're using this as a reference, we want our reference to match the level. So this is the texture that I imported. It's just a random thing off Google of Europe. Fine. What I'm going to do is come down here to texture, and on the drop down I'm just going to search the name of the texture that I imported, which is this image of Europe. I'm going to select it, and we'll see in a second once it populates on our 3D image, you actually have a 3D ball that has this image wrapped around the ball, and that's fine. It looks a little wonky on the ball, but we don't need it to stand on a ball. We just need it to work with a plane. But we need a 3D material to go on our plane. Otherwise, Unreal won't accept it. So we're sort of tricking Unreal into accepting this 2D image onto a 2D plane. Regardless, though, the next step that we're going to take is we're going to select our base matte here, and we're going to come down here to blend mode, and we're going to set it to translucent. And what this does is it enables different options on the base material, and most namely, it enables opacity. So opacity is a float value from 0 to 1. It's essentially how transparent is this on a scale of 0 to 1. So an opacity of 0.3 or 30% shows that 30% of the 2D image will reflect light, and the other 70% will pass through. So in order to do this, we need a float, or in this case, as it's called in Unreal, it's called a constant. So a constant we can set as a decimal, and we're just going to set this as 0.75. So 75% of the light it's going to block, and 25% it's going to allow to pass through. So I'm just going to click, drag this over to opacity, and just like that, we have an image that you can partially see through, but it still contains necessary information. So what we're going to do with our plane here, back in our main level, is we're going to come down here to the materials. Under the world grid material, we are going to search for our transparent. We're going to have to spell this out a little bit. Transparent image matte. And here is the transparent image matte. And we can see right away that we have a plane that has the image, but we can still see the landscape below it. And then from here, it's just a matter of lining it up with your angles, scaling it up, and making it fit your scene. And just like that, we have a plane that's over a landscape that we can do sculpting on. Let's say we have a smaller brush. We can create a mountain range here. And when we zoom down, we can see that we are editing on our landscape. But we're not affecting our plane. And that's something that I wanted to show. I think it's a pretty cool idea. Shout out to the guys in our Discord that came up with the idea. I just wanted to come up with a solution for you. I hope this helps in you creating your map. I'd love to see pictures of your map and your progress. If you have any questions, please let me know. With all that said, please like, comment, subscribe, all that jazz. It really does help us out. And we'll see you next week.